Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
3, Roman, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec, Oscar, 5, Tango, Papa, 3, Delta, Juliet, Mike, Oscar, Sierra, Victor, Kilo.
Now the main thing is done. I hold certain facts from which I cannot separate. What I know, what is certain, what I cannot deny, what I cannot reject. This is what counts. I can negate everything of that part of me that lives on vague nostalgias, except this desire for unity, this longing to solve, this need for clarity and cohesion. I can refute everything in this world surrounding me that offends or enraptures me, except this chaos, this sovereign chance, and this divine equivalence which springs from anarchy. I don't know whether this world has a meaning that transcends it, but I do know that I do not know that meaning, and that it is impossible for me just now to know it. What can a meaning outside of my condition mean to me? I can understand only in human terms. What I can touch, what resists me, that is what I understand. And these two certainties, my appetite for the absolute and for unity, and the impossibility of reducing this world to a rational and reasonable principle, I also know that I cannot reconcile them. What other truth can I admit without lying, without bringing in a hope I lack and which means nothing within the limits of my condition? If I were a tree among trees, a cat among animals, this life would have a meaning, or rather this problem would not arise, for I should belong to this world. I should be this world to which I am now opposed by my whole consciousness and my whole insistence upon familiarity. This ridiculous reason is what sets me in opposition to all creation. I cannot cross it out with a stroke of the pen. What I believe to be true I must therefore preserve. What seems to me so obvious, even against me, I must support. And what constitutes the basis of that conflict, that break between the world and my mind, but the awareness of it. If therefore I want to preserve it, I can, through a constant awareness, ever revived, ever alert. This is what, for the moment, I must remember. At this moment, the absurd, so obvious and yet so hard to win, returns to a man's life and finds its home there. At this moment, too, the mind can leave the arid, dried-up path of lucid effort. That path now emerges in daily life. It encounters the world of the anonymous and personal pronoun one, but henceforth man enters in with his revolt and his lucidity. He has forgotten how to hope. This hell of the present is his kingdom at last. All problems recover their sharp edge. Abstract evidence retreats before the poetry of forms and colors. Alright, that is the first part of Absurd Freedom from The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, technology, philosophy, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life in an accountable way can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests say on this show. How would we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things at all times after all? and like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often will revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence. Alright, very excited to be back in the proverbial saddle, coming to you from my new podcasting lair in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And what better way to celebrate than to share an awesome conversation I recorded back in February of this year with an absolute powerhouse of a guest, author, artist, witch, and many other things besides, Laura Tempest Zakroff. You may remember her from episode 91, The Golden Shadow with Aidan Wachter, and Serpents of Circe, where I talked with her and Ron Pedron about magical resistance and the Serpents of Circe project. Laura has so much going on, which you can find out more about on her website, lauratempestzakroff.com. I was really stoked that she agreed to join me back in February before my big move across the country to record a heady chat which runs the gamut from tarot to numbers to the archetypes of the witch and the magician to sigil craft, embodied magic and dance, to authority and authorship, egregores, and more. Really, really stoked to share it. But before I do, let me attend to some quick housekeeping here. If you like the show and the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There are currently no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is also an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. There are also some new items available from Illumin Industries, my Etsy shop. Find Hello Void, Hypersigils, and Cultivate Consent shirts, patches, and more. Items will be printed on demand and shipped directly to you. Thank you so much to everybody who has been supporting the show in whatever way that looks, including listening. Thank you for being here. Your support makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it and thereby justifying to myself the crazy amount of time that it takes to put it together. I really appreciate the opportunity to be making this thing, and having the resources necessary is, of course, a very important part of that. So although I'm a pretty introverted person and I don't use social media very often due to this, I'm not there like checking on stuff every day or anything like that, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc., and I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations for the listener mailbag segment. You can also reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at Lux Occult Pod, or on Blue Sky at LuxEstrada919. Alright, I will be back after the interview to share some thoughts, an announcement, and some sad news that I received with you all. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the awesome conversation that I had with Laura Tempest Zakroff. Well, my guest once again today is Laura Tempest Zakroff. How's it going?
It's going all right.
Well, you've got a lot going on. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out today and talk about some of the awesome things that you're up to, as well as some of the concepts that I'm hoping to pick your brain about. So for people that have never heard you on the show or other places, your work is all over the place. But for people that aren't familiar, what context would you give listeners about yourself?
I am an artist, an author, a modern traditional witch. I also a performer, so I do dance, also part of a band. Like I do everything except sing. Nobody wants me to sing.
Awesome. So I'm hoping that you can share a little bit about some of the things that you're most excited about. I know that you've got several new-ish decks out there. The divination decks is something that we talked about last time you were on the show, as well as the idea of sigil witchery, which I really love. It's very intuitive. You've got a book out there about sigil witchery, which I noticed today that people can listen to on Spotify, so that's cool.
I didn't know that. That's
well, there you have it.
It's one of those things where, it's such a visual book that I was surprised when they did make an audiobook of it. I was like, well, how that works, but apparently it does. So, okay,
there's a lot of people that like to watch the podcast on YouTube, even though I don't usually make like the videos of myself talking. It's usually just pictures. But so, yeah, to each their own, I suppose.
Different brains for different things.
Yes.
my brain is decompressing from writing book number 14 slash project 15, which is about the tarot and my particular neurospicy take on tarot. I'm still in this sort of numbers, movement, and magic combination. But the most recent thing that has been unleashed upon the world is the Sigil Witchery Oracle that came out in December. And that I also very excited. I mean, it's very shiny.
It is
And
so
not
very
just like,
shiny. It's
you know, like
gorgeous.
not just shiny new, it is, right? It's holographic, yay. And spot gloss. These are all good things. But as a dynamic tool. So all the oracles that I create, I see a need in the world. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm just gonna make art, throw some words on it, you know, have at it. But it's like, no, there's a problem, and I think people need a tool to work through these problems. So with the Sigil Witchery Oracle, it really helps folks to dive into shapes, symbols, the things that are really present but may often be unnoticed, right, in their day-to-day lives. And once you start seeing it, it's everywhere. Like as soon as somebody reads Sigil Witchery, takes a class with me, they're like, everywhere.
Yeah, it's a very intuitive process that you outline, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that we can kind of look into like sigil history and maybe see some places where magicians of yore perhaps were like thinking along similar lines too. I love it.
It's those, you know, those common marks. I mean, some of these marks we've been using for 250,000 years. It's like it's part, you know, it's in the DNA, it's in the cellular structure, it's in the universe of all of that coming together. And you can use the oracle not just for crafting sigils, but also movement. I mean, designing movement, doing meditation, which I think we all need more of. Especially came out of like the worst part of the pandemic, going, need to move again, need to move my body, engage with things, and just be more present. Because I think when you are dealing with such a major health thing that also affects you emotionally and mentally and spiritually, like the best way to reconnect all of that is through movement at whatever level of accessibility your body allows.
Yeah, absolutely. Know that you have a book about the magic of the body, embodied magic. I think that this is something that there's a lot of interesting ground to find there. I've recently been studying singing, and one of the things that I was kind of surprised about, should have been obvious, but it really wasn't before getting into it, is just how physical that is and how much attention I was starting to pay to like parts of my body that I didn't even know existed before, like these little parts of the throat and mouth. It's, yeah, there's something really interesting about bringing awareness to those parts of even the self that, or the physical self, that were previously unknown. Very cool.
It makes it very occult.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I love it. So you talked about your neurospicy take on the tarot. Could you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like?
So I feel like with everything that I do in life, as like he's like, this is how you do it normally, and I go, that doesn't work for me, so I'm going to find this really elaborate backdoor.
Relatable. Yes.
Like, this makes sense. People are like, no, just take this. I'm like, no, I can't. I can't just take this at face value. I need to get underneath it, come back up like a mole. Like, woo, have you seen this? And it's one of those things too where I don't even realize I'm doing it until I'm teaching it to other people, and people lose their minds, like in a good way, right? So I've always, been reading the tarot now for almost 30 years, and it's crazy. It's crazy to put that into being. I just intuitively over time developed this way of looking at the numbers. And it probably was very much related to the fact that I was also learning a lot about dance at that time, right? So you have time signatures and rhythms and patterns of those things. You have the shapes that you're making, and shapes relate to numbers. So like if you have a pentagram, it's got 5 points. If you have an octagram, it's got eight sides to it, all of those different things. And you can relate them to the major or minor arcana. And once you see that pattern in there, you can dive into many, many different patterns and equations from it. But it makes it very easy for someone to understand the number system and then pick up any deck, even playing cards, and be able to divine with them because you see the rhythm and the pattern and the emotions and the human behaviors behind those. So that's what the book is about, is all of that good combination.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, this kind of idea of the character of number or the like spiritual resonance of it, it's something that I'm like low key obsessed with as well. I've found some inroads in like alchemy and other places where this is looked at. And yeah, I love it. There's so much that one can sink their teeth into there. I'm curious, is there a certain number that's been helping you, or combination of numbers, or its energy or something like in our current climate? Is there a helper number that you've been looking to?
That's a really good question. Like, I have my standard ones, which I was born on the 13th, so 13, which seems like that's a stereotypical witchy thing, but like I've got a good
Perfect.
excuse. Right. With that, with ones and threes and the combinations of, does that show up with a 9, a 6, a 5, which corresponds to other birthdays and meanings in my life. But as when you relate that to the tarot, it's the death card. And as I write about in the book, like death isn't the end card of the major arcana. It's smack in the middle. Right?
Yeah, there's something interesting happening there in that story for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So there's about transformation and renewal and moving forward, right? And that's another thing too, is looking at bodies. Which way a body is turned can relate to, is it past oriented? Is someone looking in the present, or are they looking to the future? And in the traditional depiction of that card, death is riding to the future.
Mm.
So that's another relation of like right now, like, well, forward. We only have one direction, and that is forward, as a bit of a battle cry, if you will, or simply baseline level of hope and joy of, gotta move forward, right? We're here now. Where do we want to go? Where are we going to put that pinpoint to, that we are going to, where's that star, right? Which is my favorite card though in the deck, is the star card. So like, how are we getting to the star? How do we plot that so that we're not just like, oh, yeah, it'd be nice if things change. It's like, no, how do we get there? Because that's magic, right? It's not just wishing for a thing, it's mapping the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the death card and the idea that sometimes it's not possible to go forward without letting go of whatever it is, whatever is expired, whatever skin needs to be shed, or something like that. Yes, I share your enthusiasm about the star card as well. I'm thinking about, the card that precedes it, the tower, and these people falling out of this ivory tower, and depending on one's perspective, that can either be a horrible catastrophe that, leads to better things, or a not so horrible catastrophe that leads to better things, I suppose. But yeah, I love that outlook about the tarot and about death particularly. Thank you. Appreciate it.
The exciting thing, for just one more nerdy.
Please, yes.
So if you're at 13, you want to get to the star card at 17, the difference is 4, right? So between 13 and 17, we have 4, which is the Emperor. And if we want to get to the star from the death card, for example, we can think about foundation, concepts, guidelines, rules. What sort of discipline and focus do we need? Which means make a plan, right? So there's another way to nerd out of that, to see like, how I want to get from here to here. How do I do it? What's the math in between?
I love that. Yeah, the Emperor is a card and archetype that I've worked a lot with, especially last year in 2024. It was a very 4-oriented year in a lot of ways. And I think just sort of one of the lessons that I learned in exploring that was that I don't feel like there's a whole lot of like really healthy emperor archetypes that are expressed in our society. It's hard to look around and find the emperor in any way, any like form other than his shadow form. And I think that that's sort of like why I've had such a discomfort with that energy, a real, kind of aversion to it, if I'm honest, in the past, and to my own detriment, because it's a very useful energy. As you said, like if you're going to plot a course, if you're going to get your ducks in a row, if you're going to get your shit together and do something, the emperor is going to be your friend there. So yeah, I love that.
I think so much of it comes down to, as well, with the tarot, is it's so gendered, even though it doesn't need to be. Right? When we look at those, I also talk about, especially in the court cards, that doesn't have to be a queen is a woman and the king is a man, and like they're
Mm.
not. Some of them aren't even people when you get them in
Sure.
a
And
reading.
like they're all sort of in some ways of looking at it expressions of the fool on this journey. So it's like it's kind of baked in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a personality type. So your emperor tends to be you're very Virgo, like let's make a
Mm.
list, right? And so when we are able to divorce ourselves from that part of the archetype, which is hung up on gender, even though it doesn't need to be that way. It can be just someone who is here. How do we make this happen? Because there are people who are the empress of any gender, who are the creatrix and being able to support things and teach you about sovereignty on those levels, just as don't have to be a dude or to be like foundation.
Totally. So this kind of goes into a few different things that we've mentioned before, is the idea of the witch, of sovereignty, of talking about what does it mean to be a witch in the world, modern traditional witchcraft, things along those lines. I'm wondering if we can sort of unpack some of what that means. And also unpack it in the context of we see in the tarot, there's the magician, right? There's this kind of classic archetype of this person that has all their tools. They're perhaps a ceremonial magician. They've got their fancy robes and all their gear.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if we could sort of like take a look at these people, this witch, this magician, these different figures that we see, and sort of give ourselves some context, and maybe give the listener some context about what, different labels that they might be calling themselves might mean, and why they might be drawn to those. Or this is something that I think about a lot. I sort of think about, like, if I had to pick, like, would I say that I'm a witch or am I a magician? I'm like, well, I think based on the way that I understand those labels, the answer's probably both, because I've taken part in a lot of different like ways of doing these things. I've worked as a young person, very intuitively, very artistically, very just like kind of coming to it in my own way. But I've also done things which were very formal. I've been curious about how other people do magic. I've studied ceremonial magic. I've done things like that as well. So I would say like probably both, but I'm not sure if there could be like another thing that fits that even better, a sorcerer perhaps, or I'm not sure. So I'm wondering if we could just get into some of these labels.
So my partner likes to say often that labels are best used when self-applied.
I
Right?
love that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, what does it mean to each person? But I think it's very fascinating because how we look at words changes, from even, I say decade to decade, but where we're going right now at the speed of the internet and online communities is that I feel like things are changing in like 6 month to 1 year cycles, and whether something is popular or whether it's condemned and then becomes popular again, or, all of that. When I think about witch and magician, to me, and this, again, self-applied logic here, is I feel like witch has a spiritual, religious sort of connection. And I know people are like, no, not religion. Like, religion, when you look at what it is outside of the organized religion, like the word means to relink, to connect. And to me, witchcraft is all connection, right? It's connecting to yourself, it's connecting to the seen and unseen worlds, the spirits, bodies, earth, all of that. And so I feel like there is a very deeply contextual thing that's just more than just the work. It's more than just doing magic, doing witchcraft. It is in communion with those things. And not to say a magician can't do that, but I feel like magician tends to be like, this is more in a social context that I can apply it to any of these systems. Because I think about, John Dee, if you're thinking about, those kind of the court magicians, right? And the ceremonial, like things that are done within the Golden Dawn, Freemasonry and all of that, right? Is like, there's an order to it and there's a specificity to that order, but it doesn't necessarily connect to one particular religion. It's more connected to that group. Maybe that's
Okay.
the allegiance to a group, right?
Okay. Yeah,
system.
Interesting. Yeah.
Where witchcraft is like, fuck your systems.
Yeah, that is very interesting. One thing that I've always noticed about the way that, especially historically, like we look at magic users, you mentioned John Dee, who is, working for the queen, very much a privileged person within society, kind of given a lot of, people looked up to him, whereas somebody who was a witch maybe would have been doing similar types of divinations, not with this fancy of tools perhaps, but maybe
Right.
similar types of activities, but existed really on the sort of outskirts of what was acceptable for society because they weren't necessarily doing these things to help the queen. They might have been doing them to help other people.
Yeah, to
And
help to specifically not help the
yeah,
queen,
exactly.
right?
And so like I think there could be something in there about where one is positioned in terms of the like authority structures of a given
Mhm.
situation too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's an essay I did, oh gosh, probably been going on almost 10 years now, about called The Fallacy of Black and White Magic.
Mm,
And it pokes into the fact that basically to be a magician was to be sanctioned,
hmm
considered white appropriate magic that this is even technically outside of it's outside of race, or it's like what is acceptable within the society, what is approved by the ruling class, this God given,
hmm
right, big G, versus anything else that was unsanctioned or was not within that class. That was the witchcraft, that was the black magic, that was all of those considerations. It does go, the further you go down the line into modern society where things get blended into different racial stereotypes as
hmm
well, to kind of, to degrade that kind of work. Versus like, well, if you're this and you look like this, you're okay. But if you're that and that, it's
Bad and
unacceptable.
ew, and we're gonna burn you or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then high magic versus low magic, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of like classism that comes up in some of these discussions that I've heard for sure that it's like, oh, well, high magic is about connecting with the deities and like I love that. That's awesome. I have no problem with that at all. But to say that it's wrong to be doing magic to like pay your bills or other things like that, it's like, well, you would only not need to think about that if you already didn't worry about paying your bills. Like there's a sort of inherent bias built in there. So, yes.
Yeah, the different myths, right? Like you should never bargain for a magical tool, and I'm like, yeah, all right, and then who knows who the first source of that was, but when you're looking at Gerald Gardner and all folks and like within those classes, they were doing quite well, so they could probably commission the fanciest thing that they wanted.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a sort of historical tradition, not just in occultism, this shows up in like different areas of science as well, where people who had access to specialized information would sometimes use that position of access, that position of authority to like tell tall tales. The old herbariums are full of like these interesting stories about this flower that only blooms like under the full moon on a Tuesday. And the way that I was, taught in botany at least is like the professor is like, now, why do you all think that? Do you all actually think that this is the case, or was it that this person just wanted to sell this for like a lot more money than they would have? And it's like, okay, well, there's probably economic reasons, there's incentives that come into all of these things. So, yeah, it's difficult sometimes to kind of like parse apart like where the like actual esoteric occult like good stuff is versus like all of the tomfoolery and con personship that's been piled on it as well.
Yes, yes. Good example with like the mandrakes, right? Like you will die if pull up a mandrake. Like so, no, but nobody will pull them up because, as we know, their heart is fucked to grow. It's like, and I can appreciate too, because there are definitely things I've done I've done or thought about in whether art, dance, witchcraft, or whatever. It's like, sometimes if I just put a really bad idea out there just to see what happens, to kind of just see how it disseminates.
Yes, that is honestly, I've thought about that as well. And there's a lot of interesting things sort of that have happened with like pop culture magic, people using memes for magical purposes for sometimes very nefarious ends and stuff. There's been some really strange and interesting things that have happened in this like brave new digital space that we're in magically, which have been really interesting. And yeah, lots to unpack there. I'm hoping we could kind of return to the idea of like divine feminine, the embodied divine, and maybe sort of like bring that into the conversation of like the witch and the magician. And like, I feel like in a lot of spaces, the witch is the person who sort of has permission from society to explore more embodied practices, where I think that that might be sort of like, and I think that this even can translate now, even nowadays, where certain people, just based on like how they grew up, how they were sort of socialized and things like that, like there might be more or fewer barriers to like pursuing that type of work. I'm curious, like for people who are curious about dancing, about doing movement in their magic, but feel like nervous about that, like that might be too like weird or too far outside of their comfort zone. I'm curious if there have been any like helpful inroads that you've noticed that people have sort of taken on that front.
Yeah, it's such a difficult area because, especially for here in the United States, right? There's a very puritanical
Mhm.
puritanical taint to everything, and particularly on the Protestant side of things, right? Is this disconnect with dance and the body? All the things that where you go into that the body is evil, the body, it
Mm.
shouldn't move that way, or you should only move that way with certain people. Even if we aren't part of that system personally, it still affects everything, right? So I find that you have to ease people into it. Sort of like, getting a cat into a bath, like first make the water really warm and distract them a little bit. Then like, look, you're swimming. It's great. It's wonderful. You're wet, but it's great. So you're starting with breath, and I work through aligning people with like, you're going to start with your feet. And I use humor, which some people are like, how dare, this is very serious business. And like, we're alive. It's a crazy world, right? So, let's start with being silly because people relax. People relax more versus like, oh no, you are going to feel the blah 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 nerves and the metatarsals and the this muscles and here. They're like, that works for like 2% of the population. I'd rather get to more people. And once you've gotten someone to be like, all right, I'm going to say hello to my feet. Hello, feet. And I'm going to work up to these various centers, and I'm going to, have happy armpits and pet kittens and talk to bunnies, whatever it is that comes out of my mouth. In that short amount of time, within 10 minutes, people are like, oh, I feel so much better. I'm breathing better. Oh, my back doesn't hurt. Oh, my knees aren't hurting me. It's a simple amount of awareness. So it doesn't even require excessive movement. It doesn't like you have to go learn a special choreography and the the invoking octagon of the 7th level. So it's
You
like,
don't need to win Dance Revolution or anything.
right? Like you must be an expert and compete. And it's like, no, just first pet some kittens.
Mm.
Feel your feet, breathe, check your posture, and then doing simple exercise especially works really well with the group where people realize like, even if you don't know these people, you can start moving in sync with them because you start paying attention. You look them in the eyes, even if you're just like, I don't like to look people in the eyes, but I'm relaxed enough that I'm going to look people in the eye and just play with energy and how the body feels. And it changes people like so drastically. Like just within an hour session, people are like, wow. So what is that kind of movement? It's just how you step, how you're directing your arms. Are your palms facing you? Are you facing out? Are your fists closed? Or how is it touching your body? Is it surrounding your body? What ideas can you connect it with? Aligning with, for folks who are working with deities, like you just look at sculptures and paintings of certain deities for thousands of years, you're going to find similar postures. And when you take those postures on, suddenly you feel more of that energy versus like, oh, I'm going to like sing the song of Pan for half an hour. Like Pan's already down the road. Like you get bored after the first 30 seconds. It's like, oh, is this about me? Oh, it's not about me. It's about you. Bye. Off to go do my goody goat dance. So play, right? I think it comes down to play and imagination, like getting back to where and we talk about that so much with magic, right? In order to really be good at magic, it taps into visualization. It's tapping into having an elastic mind that, not that it's so wide open that everything falls out, but just enough that you can push things in the right direction. You push yourself in the right direction. You are starting to influence the environment, do it through movement.
Yeah, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Now, do you typically involve like music in this, or is this usually done without music?
I like to put a little bit of music. My partner is a musician, so especially plays a lot of different things, but violin is one of the things that we first initially connected over. And he was creating music for dancers at the time we got together. But the things that are for introductions or flow, right, is just to kind of have something that's relaxing for people, that softly melodic, kind of breathy. And then as people get more advanced, you can get them more into the rhythm, right? I want people to feel how the movements are in their body first without like mirrors. See how the movement feels, and then take the next step to connect it to music. Because I think far too many, I've noticed in dance class, that people are like, here's the choreography, here's the song, go do the things. It's like you never feel the music because you're so busy trying to do this movement to the step to this thing, instead of being like, oh, let me relax into it. Let me find where the doom and the tech is. And oh, there's a bass line there, and there's guitar, and it hits different parts of the body. So music is really, really helpful, but you don't want to overwhelm somebody when they're figuring out how their body works. But once I send them off into the world, I'm like, go make a playlist, have fun.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that. This is making me recall, I took this really fun, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the professor, but I will put it in the show notes. But I took this great burlesque class that was about exploring burlesque dance through the four elements. And it was a sort of idea of like, the breath, like you can sort of like see the dancer breathing, you can like communicate so much, the idea of a fire, like the heat of motion. And there's so many interesting things that you can communicate through dance, like whether it's the four elements or, what you could probably dance the tarot deck if you wanted to.
Yes.
There's all kinds of, fun that you could dance the zodiac, that just kind of fun things that spring to mind of, if people want to play and have fun. That sounds like a cool thing to explore.
Yeah, and it's a different way of learning, right? So we often benefit by having multiple ways of viewing any particular idea we're presented with. Like as a teacher, it's important for me to be able to break down a concept for somebody in at least 3 to 4 or more different ways without overwhelming them, because you have a variety of different brains. But especially for when we like think we have a concept down and then you have a slightly different angle, it unlocks more of that concept. It's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Like part of the instruction that I give in the book is, how would you move to this card? What is the shape that's present in this card? How's that connect back to the number? Like I go, ooh, all the things, they line up.
I love that. Yeah, fuck yeah. So has dance always been a part of your magical practice?
Pretty much. I've always been weird me. But when I was formally discovering witchcraft as a larger culture rather than the weird stuff I was doing in my backyard as a kid, going off into college and discovering groups and such, concurrently, the point where I started leading a pagan society was also this time where I started taking dance classes. It's just like, it was peanut butter and chocolate right there.
Yeah, no, I love it. And that's a perfect combination right there.
Like, take a bite, take a bite, take a bite. It enhances the flavor of both.
Hell yeah. I wanted to mention real quick before we move on, I have a note written down here that Puritanical Taint is my new band name. And I'm hoping we can maybe explore this idea of, the divine feminine versus the embodied divine or the embodied feminine or other kind of concepts like that. And I think that there has been a tendency that I've seen in some areas where people they'll speak very highly about aspects of the divine feminine. I think this shows up in some types of Christianity, but the actual like embodied feminine people are definitely not looked at with the same sort of like reverence. So there's a sort of like cognitive dissonance that sort of happens there, I think, for me at least. And the idea of like divine feminine, but divine anything being embodied and being something that we can celebrate here and now, and that's not somewhere far away that we need a dude in a special hat to talk to or something like that.
Right.
I was hoping we could sort of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So the reference that got me going a little while ago, is post the November election, is they're like, I'm feeling the rage of the divine feminine, and all these goddesses coming through. And I'm like, oh, they've been there.
Maybe you're just mad, and you have a right to fucking be.
Right? Like it's you. Surprise! This is that Scooby-Doo episode. Who is so enraged, divine feminine? It's you.
Who's under the mask? It's you.
I never suspected. Who would have guessed? And that it hits one of those points, because having done this now again for almost 30 years, is, I have read, they say, like, all of the different books, right? So if you're up a certain point, you've made it through the 90s, then you've probably read most of the things that were the quintessential books of the 70s and 80s, and stuff through the early O's. So we have, like, the first wave feminism and all of the uber, like, we're reclaiming the goddess, and the uber, really matriarchal stuff, and all of that came out of the sort of reaction, which we also know that a lot of that went into a hard, I don't know.
Went into some places that I don't want to go personally,
Right.
I think. Yeah.
Right. And you just not, we basically end up in turf land, and I'm like, no, too far, right? The pendulum has swung too far. And, so that's the thing.
Yes.
Yeah, like, let's just get back to center. It's a beautiful place, right? It's a beautiful place. All bodies are great. So it makes me really nervous when I see people who start, besides the fact that, like, it's you, well, not the deities, it's you, is like, oh, you're kind of running in, you're going to run right into that same old type of thing. And then you're going to have to go through this whole recorrection phase. Like, let's just skip that. Can we skip that? Can I bring you up to speed? So we have that, but we also have, and also looking at all those books on Wicca and ceremonial magic and all of those different movements from the 1940s through now, is we have the goddess. We do this for the goddess, and we have the high priest and the high priestess who represents the goddess, and we have our polarity and the gender binary, which shows the god and the goddess. Sorry, I'm
the moon and the sun, and the moon is goddess. Yes,
everything is sex,
gold and silver, and yes.
And it's like, it's a mood. It's a mood.
Sure, it's a whole paradigm.
It's a thing. But we just only have to look at modern occultism to also see that despite all of the goddess, and we're reclaiming the goddess, and we're bringing the goddess back, and yet we are treating women and non-binary people like shit. So where is that, right? So there's again this idea, like you were talking about, there's the divine aspect of it, and as soon as we put it into the body, we're not seeing the correlation. We're not seeing as above, so below, as within, so without happening. And that's why I am one of my big focuses is the embodied divine, is recognizing that regardless, outside of plumbing, outside of any of those things, that you are a human being, and part of connecting to ourselves is seeing that everything around us is part of this world that is made of star stuff, that is divine, that is part of this connection. You're part of that too. Each of us is part of that. And if we can find that divine within ourselves, then we can see it within each other.
Yeah, fuck yeah. I love it. I'm just recalling, actually, somebody a while back invited me to be a guest on their show, and he had said, like, well, I'm really, like, interested in, like, the divine feminine, and I have a high reverence for women and stuff. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll think about this. I listened to a couple episodes, and there was another guest on the show that had said some things that I had found kind of problematic that I wanted to address, at least when I came on. And I was like, well, could we have a conversation before I come on your show, so, I could talk through what I'm hoping to say, so that you won't be offended when I say it when we're recording or whatever. And yeah, just the idea that, like, this would happen was so problematic for this person that they, like, ghosted me. They're like, no. It's like, well, how do you want me to be a guest on your show? You're not even willing to have a conversation with me first. Like, how's that gonna work, dude? Like, so yeah, just this kind of idea of, like, oh, I'm so reverent, and that I love that. Like, thank you, but, like, let's actually talk then, please. Like,
Challenge some of those ideas and think about it and unpack it.
Yeah.
And, what does it take to have those representations? Like, you see the lists of books that show up online, and some of them are the same things written by white dudes that have been around forever, that are out of date in so many different ways, that aren't accurate in the information that they've come from. Like, yes, they might be classic, but put them on the classic reading list rather than the how to do the thing reading list. But the people who are still more comfortable in, again, there are many fantastic folks in this community who are cisgendered white dudes who I adore, but like, here, like, this is your list. I'm like, where are all the women and the non-binary people? Like, where is everybody outside of this spectrum? There's plenty of books out there who are doing fantastic work, but it's this is where we feel comfortable and safe. I'm like, can you get a difference of opinion here? Can you see another perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about this a lot, and I think a part of it doesn't necessarily come from like a place of malice or anything. I think it comes from sort of like a place of where people feel comfortable putting authority. Like, where
Yes.
is authority supposed to be? Where is our comfort zone for that? Who is the news anchor supposed to be, right? Like, who's the trusted voice on the radio that will tell us what's going on, right? Like, that's
Yes.
a sort of like, there's a sort of like archetype that we have as a culture for that I think we have to sort of actively take measures to go against if we want it to change. And if we're not sort of being very conscious about that, we just sort of fall right into that rut again.
Exactly. And it's such a thing, and any person of any gender can fall into that. I've had people go like, oh, why didn't you have so and so's work, in your book? Like, because it's my work.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need, again, a cisgendered white man to validate anything that I'm saying that I've done through decades of work. Like, it
Yeah, absolutely. And
doesn't need to happen that way.
in some places, like, you're never going to sort of, depending on who you are, like, get the same type of recognition as somebody that has a different body or whatever it is, right? Like, that's just might not be like, this is something that I think a lot about, and I've worked in a lot of spaces which are sort of like male dominated. I used to be an automotive mechanic. I used to, do other things. And like there's always a sort of interesting like question for me there about like, where is the ceiling here? Like, versus my own personal competence. And a question that still remains to be answered, I suppose.
Yeah. Until we change timelines again, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting things to think about here in terms of these broader social structures, like things like, patriarchy or capitalism or any isms, like being in a sort of animist sense, like its own sort of egregore. And like, what is our relationship to this thing, like as a species? Is it helping us? Is it hurting us? Is this thing friendly? I don't know, right? It doesn't seem like it's maybe that benevolent. I'm not sure, right? So I think maybe unpacking things from that sort of animist perspective can be really interesting as well.
Yes, that's a fascinating way of thinking about it, because as soon as you are able to personalize it, right, and to be able to give it that sort of context, and it stops being a thing that's just out there. This is an idea. Though I tend to be of the mind that ideas also have their own little personalities and agendas.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Smaller scale. But we think like, oh, that's just the thing. Like, no, it's an actual structure, and if there's a consciousness to it, there's a zeitgeist to it. You can work with that. You can work against that. There's a way to undo it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a way to sometimes communicate with it. There's all kinds of ways of interacting with spirits, right? For
Yes.
lack of a better word, I suppose. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, lots to think about here. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you would like to talk about? Or are there any questions you would like to ask me?
Oh gosh. We've got on some really
I know this has been heady. I appreciate it.
The thing is, so it's so important to dig into these things, right? To look at the history of magic and witchcraft and what different social structures have imposed and what different social things have created within our culture. We're at this very interesting point in humanity where we want to define and dig into all of the things, which I think is very, very important. But at the same time, we can get so obsessed with labels that we are also separating everything out, right? So if we think about the larger vision, here we go, the death card, moving forward with our flag, what is on our flag and how many people can we get underneath that flag, to come with us to get there? Because, I think we talk about these things more just to kind of sort out the problems and get closer and better connected. Because I'm sure there are people listening who are like, oh, like, don't make me feel uncomfortable.
It's okay. It's okay, everybody. If you feel uncomfortable, that's okay. That's part of learning and growing, I try to make myself uncomfortable every day.
Right? That's a good motto. Make yourself uncomfortable at least once a day, twice on Sundays.
Easy if you have social anxiety.
Yes, right? It's like we're not talking about these things to create division or to, upset people and be like, you're bad. Like, no, again, like talking to my peers who are cisgendered white dudes, right? Like their books aren't bad. They're not bad people. It's how are we creating structure that is more equitable for everyone, that does a better job of honoring humanity, that does a better job of honoring the planet. So I think we're hitting this really interesting point in time where we need to express these things cleanly and clearly, and dive into them, but also draw people in versus push them away. That's kind of where my brain's at right now. Like, how do we solve this problem? You and I can solve it.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Like, for those that like have the spoons to sort of like work at those margins and like really have the empathy and patience to like understand where somebody is like it's impossible to sort of like bring somebody to where you are under your flag or whatever it is if you're not willing to like meet them where they already are. And that can take a lot of patience, it can take a lot of empathy, and both of those things take a lot of like energy, and not everybody has the spoons, has the energy, like not everybody's in a position where they're able to do that and stuff either. And so like I think for those people that are, like there's a lot of difference that can be made, and like welcoming somebody to your perspective doesn't usually involve like telling them that they're a fucking idiot or they're the worst first, like, so yeah.
Unless that's their kink, then.
Oh yeah, I mean, unless that you've like discussed that beforehand and negotiated it carefully, and you're not going to say something that they don't want to hear. Or yes, exactly. If somebody likes to be insulted, I will say all kinds of mean things to them, but otherwise I try to avoid it.
Right.
Well, where can people find your work?
Oh, you go to a crossroads.
Go to the crossroads at midnight, bring 3 eggs and 3 silver coins.
And 2 cookies.
Don't forget the cookies.
And the whiskey. So most of my work is published through Llewellyn, which has the added bonus of being distributed anywhere. So any bookstore, shop, anywhere can order Llewellyn, carry it. So it's my favorite places. Recommend your favorite local bookstore or witchy shop is great if you can't buy it directly from me. Also, the New Aradia series, which is the New Aradia, the Gorgon's Guide to Magical Resistance, and the Serpents of Circe, those are through Revelore Press, which can get things from Revelore, or they are carried by a variety of different distributors as well. And then I live online. I have a website. I have combined all of my websites into one Voltron-like website.
Sweet.
And that's lauratempestzakroff.com. So that's the nexus of where all my different crossroads intersect.
Sweet. All right. Hell yeah. People can find one of my Hecate psalms in the Serpents of Circe. People are interested. Very excited to be part of that project. Very cool. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today and share all of the I feel like we've covered so much ground. My head is kind of spinning, to be honest, but in a good way. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you've got a lot going on, which is very exciting, and yeah, appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much. This was a great conversation. I'm like, wow, how do we talk for so long? And it's like felt like 10 minutes.
I know, right? Yeah, gosh. I would not have noticed except for I'm getting very hungry. So.
3, Romeo, 2, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
All right, thanks so much to Laura Tempest Zakroff for joining me. Check the show description for a link to her website to find all of her awesome offerings, including books, divination decks, classes, and more. Looks like she's got a lot going on for this spooky season. You can check out the events tab there. She's got all kinds of events coming up, including a Witches' Night Out market in Providence, Rhode Island on October 24th. That sounds rad, and all kinds of other really cool stuff. So go ahead and check that out. So We covered so much ground in today's conversation, and even though we recorded it months ago, a little bit embarrassed about how long it's taken me, but moving is crazy, whatever, it felt even more relevant to me when I listened to it recently during the editing process. I really like what Laura said about labels working best when self-applied. I suppose when it comes to my own continual questions about the witch and the magician archetypes, investigating where one sits in relation to, like, the given power structures around you might lend some clues about how your own magic plays with these structures or powers of authority. I think this is something that we kind of touched on a little bit today. And as some of the structures of power and authority around us grow increasingly dysfunctional and malignant in this dysfunctionality, power being wielded with clumsy ham-fistedness and a lot of damage to our society resulting, it seems like a great opportunity to take stock of how we wield our own power in our lives, and to take stock of where that power lives, and to take accountability for it if we haven't already, so that we can use it properly and for our own purposes. Taking accountability for one's own power can be hard when one has been conditioned to feel powerless or has been the victim of dynamics like learned helplessness and that kind of thing. The individuals and systems who impart these types of feelings of powerlessness and learned helplessness typically do so through abuse dynamics, which are now well studied and can be understood and recognized in the wild and in our lives. And on a little bit of a side note, I'm pleased to announce that some folks from the Green Mushroom Project and I have recently pressed play, as it were, on our newest pop culture magic monstrosity, an anti-abuse entity called Miscongeniality, tasked with helping users recognize abuse dynamics and providing a variety of means of support and resources towards having less of these dynamics around. The name is taken from the 2000 film starring Julia Roberts, and big thanks to Frater for the assist in designing Miss C, and to everybody who helped and chimed into the discussion that we had the night that we initialized the working. But I digress. So Crowley said about magic, paraphrasing here, that we're all doing it all the time anyway, so we might as well pay attention and do it right. I'd extend this idea to power. We all have power in our lives, in some areas of our lives, to some degree or another. This power comes from a lot of places, many of them places we might not get to choose or do much of anything about except deciding how we'll use what's been handed to us. Tricking people into feeling scared and powerless, whether that's a fear of going to hell or fear that, I don't know, a random immigrant will do a stranger danger crime to you or whatever else, creating what I call fears of unlikely outcomes to manipulate people and steal and subsume their personal power is central to many of the large-scale games being played right now, and perhaps it always has been. So it's best to pay attention and make sure that you're using your own power how you think it should be used and not accidentally lending it to someone else who you might not want to have it, or propping up things that you don't actually agree with through tacit consent and inaction. So the study of magic is, in part, the study of how power works in the world. That's why it can be so important, at least in my mind, to supplement your study of magic with subjects like natural science and history and philosophy, etc. We live in a world which is one big system, and magic is part of how that system works. The better you can be at understanding the whole system, the more effectively you'll be able to use magic. This concept is sort of central to Hermeticism and a lot of astrological magic, as above, so below, right? Science and spirituality and other modes of inquiry taken together as a means of understanding the world around us as a whole is sort of what's at the heart of classical occultism. Studying and working with the powers that be. On our spiritual journeys, or magical paths, or whatever else we like to call it that we're up to gain wholeness and agency in the world, we begin to gain power as part of this. There seem to be check-in points, places where we are tested along this journey of power, if you will. And this can be super organized as part of a tradition with lots of structure, but I think it also happens organically on its own, too. A sort of touchstone in my mind for this concept in pop culture is the part in the Lord of the Rings movie when the elf queen, Galadriel, is tempted to take the One Ring from Frodo the Hobbit, but is ultimately able to fight off the urge. And she says afterwards that she can still keep her name and stay the same person or whatever. But the point is that her path is not derailed by the temptation, and she's able to use her power to help Frodo on his quest to destroy the ring, rather than trying to take the ring for herself. One thing that I have noticed, and this is a concept that shows up again and again in different outfits and different paradigms, so I certainly won't take credit for it, but I have observed it myself firsthand, so I can vouch for its accuracy. Oftentimes in the world, or in our magical studies or paths, power which is misused or abused is lost. If you abuse it, you tend to lose it. If, in Lord of the Rings, Galadriel had taken the ring, I'm guessing that, like so many other people in the story before her, she would have become a thrall to its power, rather than gaining any actual agency of her own. Yes, lots to think about there with Galadriel and the ring, indeed. I take some comfort in the following notion. The big system that we live in, the strange attractor of our reality which hovers about the dynamic equilibrium of the void, is full of feedback loops and self-correction mechanisms. Lasting power cannot be seized because power is a two-way street, a circuit. And on some deep and intuitive level, probably having to do with the somatic inputs of an embodied experience as a mortal creature, I think everybody sort of knows this. And perhaps some of the fear that's being mongered is simply a fear of reality itself. Okay, lots to get into here still today, including a Patreon supporter bibliomancy reading, but I'm stoked to announce that we're going to be starting an 8-week study course about the Headless Rite, or Bornless Ritual. So this was something that my little community sort of suggested, and something that I'd been thinking about wanting to do for a while now, since before I moved. After the most recent iteration of the Persephone Returns from the Underworld ritual I ran back in April, which includes my adapted version of the Headless Rite, people mentioned wanting to get into exploring the tech and customizing it for their own purposes the way that I have. So I built what I believe will be a pretty approachable inroad for advanced beginners at Magick, while also being rigorous enough to challenge people who want to be challenged and who are into that. You can kind of take it at your own pace and approach it in your own manner. I'll share a suggested course of study for the Rite, or magical homework packet, if you will, that walks people through some of the steps that I took to eventually create my own adaptation of the Rite, and people can also have the opportunity to create theirs and share it if they want to. It's going to be 3 lectures about history and context, the structure of invocation, and much more. We're going to talk about the magician's voice, and I'm going to provide some tips that I've picked up by taking singing lessons and training my voice for magical purposes. There will also be 4 discussion, check-in sessions where participants can discuss how the work is going and, touch base and ask questions. And the penultimate one is going to be a chance for everybody to share their work. We're going to be subverting some previous thinking about the tech, and since we're going to be operating within the parameters of Void House, we're going to keep consent front and center and discuss the possible risks and rewards of working with a Rite like this, and look at the ways that it, or any other intense activity, can potentially be used to control rather than empower people. Students will be encouraged to go at their own pace and approach the work in whatever way best suits their individual circumstances. It's going to be the first time this course is offered, and because it's still semi-experimental, I'm going to be offering it for pretty cheap this time, and to a pretty small group of people. I'm really, really stoked about it. I've gotten so much out of experimenting with this tech for a few years, and I'm stoked now to be able to guide others on their own journeys with it. It's going to be Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern from October 21st to December 9th. I put a link in the show description. If it goes well, I'll likely run the class again soon, so don't despair if it fills up this first time and you want it to take it. Alright, fuck yeah, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. Shout out and thank you to Eric and Marcio for the kind words and support on Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. Greetings to Jayway on Blue Sky. And thanks so much to Brad on Patreon for the support and giving me permission to share the recent bibliomancy reading I performed. Let's listen. Greetings, Brad. This is Luxa here to do your bibliomancy reading. Thanks so much for your support on the Patreon, and thanks so much for the kind words as well. So I'm reporting to you from my brand new podcasting lair, but my books are still in a little bit of disarray, so I'm going to be using the abbreviated roll table that I created for the move. So I'll go ahead and roll a d6 as we ask Eris on your behalf, what's next? Alright, I've rolled a 2, which corresponds to the book A Critique of Pure Tolerance by Robert Paul Wolfe, Barrington Moore Jr., and Herbert Marcuse. Let me go ahead and find that text and we will consult it. Alright, I have returned with the tome in my hand. Oh, Eris. What is next for Brad? Criticism, mainly Marxist, that actually have been made of this society. It may be possible to discern the constant and recurring features of rational social criticism. So it sounds like criticism is going to be involved in things in some way, mainly Marxist, that actually have been made of this society. It may be possible to discern the constant and recurring features of rational social criticism. You mentioned in your missive that you're going to be headed off to do some educational stuff, and I'm wondering if this critical thinking, this sort of criticism of society might be a part of that. Perhaps it will show up in some other way. The gods know that there is, of course, plenty to criticize about society these days, and of course in most days. Well, once again, I really appreciate the support and the kind words. I hope that this finds you well, and best of luck on your new journey. Cheers. Thanks so much to Brad for allowing me to share that with you all. Greetings and a hearty fuck yar to all the pocket wizards. Much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project and Void House, regardless of what that looks like for you in your practice. Green Mushroom Project, of course, is an ongoing group magical working based on the metaphor of the relationship some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of the project, are like a forest of trees, the mushroom hyposigil current connects us and strengthens us in unseen ways. In addition to the mycelial web, which connects us, there are the mushroom's spores, which are little packets of the current's energy, which can be applied to situations as needed by any participant. We talked about this a little bit in the recent bonus episode, which was a panel discussion about navigating desire in a magical practice. Green Mushroom Project's new big meta-experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent and providing consent education to magically inclined people, organizing consent-centered magical spaces for group work, both in person and online. Fuck yeah. Thanks to everybody who has reached out over the drought time when I was moving, and to everybody who's been supporting the show by rating, reviewing, and giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Whether or not it was featured, know that all the missives I receive are appreciated. Thank you so much to the people who are making it possible to make this show by giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all your friends, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at the next PTA meeting, choir rehearsal, bake sale, anarchist collective coffee clutch, seance, or ceremonial potluck you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is already doing so. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button or alarm or whatever it is on your app so that you can get updates when a new episode comes out. Gratitude. Okay, I have some final thoughts and some sad news to share with you all. A friend of the show and generally very chill and helpful person, Dave Neal, has recently passed on. You can hear my conversations with him in episode 26 and 45, and can watch the trauma-informed practices presentation he and I put together for Void House called Just the Tips on YouTube. You can also hear some of Dave's poetry in episode 31 and other places. He was incredibly generous in sharing his expertise and about his own experiences in helping the listeners of this show and I understand concepts like neuroplasticity and how this is involved in healing from trauma. He was an absurdist and a Discordian, and understood how unseriousness can be a powerful mode of surviving in the world, a la Albert Camus' Myth of Sisyphus, which I read a little bit from in the beginning of the show in Dave's honor. He loved acting in the theater and existential philosophy. He used to send me these really cheesy memes that I've been going back to look at for smiles. I'm planning to share some of those on Instagram with y'all. Back when I was living in one of the various hotels I ended up staying in during the move, Dave mentioned that he'd been having some health problems. I didn't realize that they were serious. I was too distracted by the chaos in my own life to notice much of anything else, to be honest. And knowing that I was struggling, I think he might have decided not to tell me, not wanting to worry me or whatever. It's impossible to know. But I do know that I regret not having the time to read the last book that he recommended to me before he passed. I would have liked to have had the opportunity to discuss it with him, and I'll be forever grateful for all of his help and for his friendship. One way that I would like to honor Dave's memory is by holding close a lesson that he taught. It has to do with remembering that no matter how battered and beaten down by the world or by our experiences we might feel, healing is possible. Nothing about us is fucked up beyond all hope of repair. And sometimes a path to healing can be found in the absurd, in not straying away from the darkness, but in looking straight into its maw and laughing at the cosmic jest one finds at that threshold. It's been a really challenging year in many ways for many people. I could say a lot more about this, but rather than dwell on these Saturnian matters and the nature of the psychopomp, etc., I'm instead going to read with you all the last poem that Dave shared with me. Dave wrote, "Was reading through a Corso poem and thought you'd get a giggle out of this. His stuff was hit or miss with me, but the hits are bangers, haha." So here it is. It's a poem by Gregory Corso called God is a Masturbator. Folks, sex has never been more than a blend of bodies doing for one another that which pleases them and evolution to do, either in desire or in desperation or in necessity. It serves no purpose other than love and life's purpose. Sexualists are a product of sex. We are made by sex. Sex made the Salvation Army. We are sex. There is nothing dark about this magic, and those pangs of lust which make you sick, those unthinkable dreams which fill you with doubt. As long as wild joys emit from an enthusiastic spirit, eat the dust, shout. Thank God one's thoughts excite as much as flesh. Thank God there's a place in all this he and she, and he and he, and she and she, for me and me. Fuck yeah. Gratitude, Dave, for sharing that with me and for everything else that you shared. You will be remembered and you will be missed. Alright, as is customary, allow me to now share the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance with you all, as I remind you that even if you're grieving, especially if you're grieving, remember to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Tempest Zakroff for joining me today. Check out her website for all of her awesome offerings, including books and decks and classes and events and all kinds of stuff. Thank you so much for all the kind words and support for the show and my other work. Thank you to Hecate and The Void and all of Team Unseen. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Occult reminding you to stay strong, guard your mind, and stay fucking curious.
can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
This man is obviously a psychotic.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Women sense my power, and they seek the life essence. I do not avoid women, Mandrake. But I do deny them my essence.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
Well, I've been to one World Fair, a picnic, and a rodeo, and that's the stupidest thing I ever heard come over a set of earphones.
Hey, what's up? I'm Luxa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah.
Levels.